Welcome everyone to the CAW Network USA webinar, The Secret Weapon of Great Internal Auditors, Sales and Relationship Skills, featuring our guest speaker, Shane Rogers. I'm David Powell, and I'm replacing our planned moderator, Shingi Gwindingwi, as unfortunately she is now not available. She hopes to join us at a future webinar. Before we begin, we have some housekeeping announcements. Handouts are available. You can download them from the GoToWebinar control panel on your screen for this event. We will also post the handout on our website when we post the edited recording. CPE and polls. This webinar is CPE eligible if you have requested it. To qualify, you will need to answer at least 3 of the polling questions we will be asking during the webinar. There are 4 polls during the webinar, as well as a survey when you exit. After the event, the survey will allow us to know what you think, and also if you want to connect to our presenter. The format of the webinar is a 60-minute presentation, including this introduction. If you have questions, note them in the chat tab on the or the Q&A tab at the bottom right of your screen. And what we'll do is, if we can get to the questions, that's fine. If not, we'll come back to you separately after the event. Our learning objectives. This is slide 2. Understanding the central role that sales skills play in internal audit work and how we are perceived and valued by key stakeholders. The need to invest in and build out sales capabilities within internal audit team ranks. Appreciating the what and how supporting internal audit positioning to connect effectively with key stakeholders and to add more value. The different sales domains that internal audit leaders operate in and required strategies covering board and audit committees, meetings with audit committee chair and management, the audit team and coordinated assurance partners, external audit and regulators, then effective strategic sales audit vision, master relationship sales with key management, valuing informal out of audit cycle meetings and activities, and finally, understanding the need for rebalancing internal audit activities away from pure transactional sales. Okay, so next up, we would normally have a bio of Shingi and I'd introduce her. However, we're going to bypass that, and I'm going to move to our first poll and introduce Shane. Shane, can you please move the slides ahead? Thank you. So I've launched the poll, and it's basically, how would you describe your sales skills in an internal audit sense? Are you an expert, developing, somewhat new? As for Shane, he's Global Head of Operational Risk Management at Liberty Mutual. And before his current role, Shane was Managing Director and Chief Audit Executive for Swiss Re in the Americas. He is currently Board President of Chartered Accountants Worldwide Network USA and is a fellow Chartered Accountant of Ireland. Shane has 25+ years global experience in banking, asset management and insurance with Pricewaterhouse, CS First Boston, Credit Suisse, Swiss Re, and now Liberty Mutual. He is well known in the internal audit industry and presented at IIA Great Audit Minds and IIA Ignite Emerging Audit Leaders conferences in 2023. Shane has authored many risk and internal audit articles. See his LinkedIn profile. And with that, I'm going to move to close the poll. Let me just do that. And I'm going to share the results with you. And it looks like 33% not an area I focused on, 10% are experts. So Shane, it's across the board. I'll pass to you. Take care.
Thank you so much, David, for that introduction, and great welcome to everybody. Hopefully you'll get some value out of this 1-hour webinar focusing on the secret weapon of great internal auditors, sales and relationship skills. Yeah, it's good to hear the polling results. A lot of internal auditors don't often think about sales and relationships being a core skill. And I think as we go through this presentation and you sort of reflect on the topics and feedback, I think you'll come away saying that, actually, when you think about it, there's actually a lot of sales and relationship activities in the world of internal audit. I think it will help internal auditors be more effective and more valuable to their organizations. Glad also to hear that some people feel they're expert, and that's good. That's definitely probably definition or a key thing of being a part of a progressive internal audit function. So let's just move into the webinar itself. So what does internal audit sell? Well, I think we sell value potential or potential value to our organizations, but I don't think the what it's pretty clear, right? I don't think any of us say, well, no one really knows what internal audit is trying to achieve, right? We often have a vision in terms of providing assurance. We have different products that we do that with. We're obviously, I think, a key part of the internal audit mandate is sort of deterrence, particularly against fraud. We provide assurance that is objective and independence. We're definitely a set of independent functions, and we have objectivity and integrity. So I think all of that's pretty clear, right? So I'm not going to focus on the what, right? What I want to focus on today is the how. How should we deliver a what that's valuable to our organization? So how do we become forward-looking? How do we use, agility, and not necessarily full-blown audit agility, although some audit functions are, and I've experienced being running an agile audit team myself, and is a very valuable skill set. But what I mean is about being responsive to risk and actually, engaging with management so that your audits are welcomed, and actually that you have that sort of connection with management about what topics and risks that really matter much more here and now. Being transparent and really, converting all that potential into real impact across your organizations. So if you take a step back and you think about sales skills from an internal auditor perspective, the ones that the circles you see on the screen are the things that, to me, I've always tried to encourage across the audit teams that I've managed over the years. And particularly it's that influencing set of skills, right? So, how do you influence management? How do you sort of share perspective, be open-ended about it? You've got some findings and you've got some exceptions, you're trying to put into a broader context. We often talk about internal auditors. One of the greatest skills we can have is influencing without control. So again, that often means, how good are we at convincing management? How transparent are we? How do we build up a big picture view? Particularly if you're taking like sample results and if you haven't pivoted to full data testing or hypothesis testing, you're so often going in with 2 out of 50 have a problem. It's still you still have to convince management that, like most people say, 2 out of 50 is not bad actually. You have to convince them about the sort of where the control breakdowns are and where the risks are, and that you might be just getting lucky, right? And how we articulate that is really important as well, right? So we certainly don't want to have like really long-winded audit reports or findings. I think there's a great skill, and it's not really covered in this webinar, but sort of writing audit comments in the negative. So I had a very simple rubric: who has not done what, plus a risk statement, plus a root cause statement, and backup. That's it. Keep it very sharp, and every extra word you use in writing audit comments is another potential for mistake, as one of our board members used to always say to us. But it's also important for internal auditors to sort of not just to have commercial skills, to really understand the business, understand the sort of ebbs and flows of the business. Obviously right now with all these tariffs being announced and a feeling of a trade war globally, very important to understand the ebbs and flows and how's that going to impact business flows and volumes and risks and all that sort of stuff. So it's a critical topic to get your head around. Being empathetic, understanding that a lot of times audit results are often perceived to be negative because it's criticism, but it's really to play that forward and really say it's not so much criticizing, it's helping the organization progress and helping the team and the function to become better. So again, all these things build into how we develop trust, how we have positive impact, and how we add value to our organizations. So again, I look at this slide and I say it's really, as I said at the start, it's about sort of converting all that potential into real value, okay? And that's what we want to focus on as we start selling. So if you think about internal audit, and the graph on the left doesn't particularly mean anything in terms of the sizing of the pieces of the pie chart. It's really the list on the right-hand side. I'm sure every internal auditor that's on the webinar will say, yeah, these are all things I do, or most of these things I do pretty routinely. Hopefully you've got a good vision. You've got ongoing relationships with management. You obviously develop audit plans, scope the audits, find issues, report them, present them to audit committees, and work with coordinated assurance partners. Every single one of those items on the right, there's absolutely an element of selling. And so it's that core, comes back to some of those core skill sets we mentioned before: influencing, convincing, getting the right context, being forward looking, okay? Really having that sense of, are we helping the organization progress, and are we really focusing on things that really matter here and now? So each of these items is an area where internal audit will use an element of selling skills and relationship skills to add value to the organization. So if I think about sales domains in an internal audit world, I think about the 4 circles on the top. And I think about, obviously, there's a strategic domain, which is probably much more about the audit committee, very executive management and the board, and maybe some, if you're in a highly regulated industry, let's say you're in investment banking, obviously dealing with the Fed or the SEC. It's that sort of very strategic. You got to get that strategic plan right. You got to make sure you have the right vision. If you go to the next circle, it's the relationship circle, which is really much more about how you interact with, I would say, executive management, the department heads, their key deputies, and probably specifically also the audit committee chair. Okay, so in terms of that, you're going to be selling risk assessments to them, the audit plan, your thoughts on the audit, maybe are you doing the right type of methodology? Are you applying the right methodology? Particularly if you've flexed, and a number of audit functions in the last 4 or 5 years have moved from traditional auditing to agile auditing. We've moved from sample-based to hypothesis, full population testing, and now, of course, most internal audit functions are grappling with, and how do we apply AI and bring AI into the equation, right? So there's a lot going on, but again, having that sort of thinking of management as and having that relationship sales domain is important. Then it's the third circle, which is the transactional domain, which to me is much more the routine of doing audits, right? You've got an audit on the plan, you execute it, you do your testing, you do your data analysis, you scope it, you find your issues, you report them, you generate insights, all that stuff. You rate the report, rate the issues. Very, very tried and tested, path. No surprises there really about the transactional domain. And then there's the cultural ecosystem, and I think that's interesting too, because it's very much about the team members, the talent you've got in the internal audit function, and probably also extend that to working with your coordinated assurance partners. Everyone wants to be part of something, and they want to feel like they're part of something that's best of breed, best practice, is dynamic, is progressive. So it's kind of, again, it's an area, particularly for like chief audit executives, where you have to take a step back and make sure you've got the right culture in the team, the right skill sets, the right vision for the team, and there's sort of continuous improvement and continuous growth. So there's lots of sales domains in internal audit. But again, the one we'll go into a couple more slides. So this slide, kind of an important one. So if you take the audit committee, for example, which has been part of that strategic domain, audit committees, they really value, and the members of the audit committee, they tend to value, in my experience, audit having a clear vision and really, helping them with their overall stewardship, right? So they want internal audit to say, we've kind of boiled the ocean for you. We kind of looked at the organization many different ways. We've taken in your sort of guidance and steer on stuff that really matters. It could be like, key values of the organization. It could be key projects and programs, key businesses. We've boiled all that down. We sort of present back in sort of big picture terms, the key risks, the key areas of focus. And so again, your strategy when you're dealing with the audit committee is definitely, again, be their eyes and ears, boil the ocean and help them fulfill that stewardship role, right? And that's why, again, you need to have a grasp of the details, but typically with audit committees, you almost want to be the sort of almost consider yourselves like the conscience of the organization, that you're trying to progress. These are the reasons you have limited capacity to do audits every year. You want to make sure that you pick the right ones and the right types of audits, and that covers key risks, key themes, and really resonates with your audit committee. And then you have the management domain, which is much more about, management, they want to be treated fairly. They want transparency. They need audit to be empathetic, understand like, hey, not everything is perfect. And, we understand management doesn't really often live in the world of perfection. And probably sometimes internal auditors could be accused of maybe being a little bit perfectionist. So you gotta reconcile that. You gotta be a bit more empathetic. You gotta want to add value. You're going to be, responsive to risk, and equally have trust and integrity. You want to develop a relationship with them, an ongoing relationship. So again, to me, it's always thinking about yourself being sparring partners and helping the business, being tough on them and helping them be successful. And the analogy I always give is in a professional boxer getting ready for a prize fight. The professional boxer will employ a sparring partner or partners to mimic the opponent. And over the 6 or 8 weeks preparation in the gym, it's the sparring partner who is getting the prize fighter ready for the big fight. So the big fight comes along, fighter wins, the boxer wins the title. You know, he gets all the accolades or she gets all the accolades, but it's the sparring partner who's really helped get them into that position in the first place. And the sparring partner is the unsung hero. And that's why internal audit, set yourselves out to be great sparring partners with management. It's a great way to think about having that relationship. And then you have the audit team. And again, most audit teams, I think people like to be considered the place to be, you know, have a positive risk culture, be part of something. Everyone wants to be part of something good. Nobody wants to be part of something that, you know, is kind of not performing, not progressive, sort of outdated or backward. Nobody wants to be part of an audit function like that. So again, just think about sort of making sure that you have your team and your leadership styles. Like, you want to be catalyst for positive organizational change. And that doesn't mean just doing big formal audits and finding lots of issues. That means, you know, 1, having continuous learning, 2, having great set of talent, 2, 3, moving people around into different functions in rotations. It means many, many things. Generating insights and issuing calls to action, which we'll get to later on in the webinar. Very, very important stuff. And then finally, it's just a sort of domain about the external audit, the regulators, and they just want internal audit to be trusted. They want a back channel often. It's like they want you to be reliable. If you tell them something, it's actually correct. And the same would go for your external auditors as well. So you've seen the fly past, and you know this slide is the same slide as this one. Just I think this version is much more maybe I think internal audit's reality today, and where I think we need to do some strategic rebalancing. So my sense, and I always struggled with this, I think when I was a Chief Audit Executive at Swiss Re, was that most internal audit teams, they tend to just be heads down and doing the transactional auditing. They're very, very good. Every audit had a start, a middle, and an end. We had you know different sprints. Obviously, we were an agile team. But if you take a step back, you got to look at how am I spending the right amount of time on the strategic domain, the relationship domain, particularly in terms of generating opportunity and informal value in that domain. And then also, don't ignore your team, because if you ignore your team and you don't set the right framework for your team's development, you'll find your talent leaves, and then you'll be stuck with auditors who haven't left, who may not be quite the rosy talents you wanted in your team. So you boil it all down. Point here for internal audits to be much more than a transactional counterparty. So don't just be head down doing audits, ticking and tying one after the other. Spend more time with management, get the relationship and the conversations going. And don't be overly wedded to sort of formality. A lot of things which I'm going to talk about later on will be more about being informal. And that's where informality builds a lot of trust, okay? And again, don't forget your internal audit team. So to realize more value in internal audits, we're going to rebalance some of the transactional sales effort to being much more strategic and sort of relationship focused and focusing on our team in terms of the risk culture of the team. And with that, David, we're at polling question number 2. I'll hand over to you.
Thanks. I'm just launching the poll now, Shane. The poll is there. And the question is, does your audit function have a clear vision, supported by strategic change initiatives? And the answers are yes, no, or don't know. Okay, closing the poll. I'm going to share the results, and it looks like over half say yes, thirds say don't know, and the rest are no. So Shane, back to you.
Yeah, no, thanks. Thanks for running the poll, David, and for sharing the results. So again, I think if you haven't got a vision as an audit function, you really need to, as a takeaway from this webinar, start talking about having an audit a vision. And a vision is interesting. A vision is not so much about doing better audits or faster audits. A vision is kind of the North Star, and it often won't even mention the word audit or internal audit, right? It's kind of it could be a 2 or 3 year view. It could be about talking about the capabilities that you want in the team, what you want the team to be known for with management, how you want to, you know, it's almost like you're the culture of the team, how it's perceived. And again, the interesting thing about defining a vision is that when you get close to achieving your vision, then you should regroup and set an even more ambitious vision. So, you know, we'll talk a little bit about vision and the how in some of these sessions here. So again, an audit vision. So if you think about this, it's almost like developing a strategic plan for your function in many respects. And it's interesting that the IIA, I think, has always encouraged audit functions to have a vision, But there is a lot more focus now, I think, in the new standards that they issued, I believe, January 1 last year, that really does focus on having a strategic plan for an audit function, which I think is a good thing. And so, again, in terms of setting your vision and having the big picture plan, of course, you want to focus on the big picture opportunities. You want to make sure that you're connecting well with your management, and you really want to sort of, focus. To me, the value is going to be from having a vision and a strategic plan that aligns to it. So, what we did, this has gone back quite a while, but I worked in and led a very progressive audit function that pre-pandemic was already doing pretty much all of its audits, full data hypothesis testing. We got out of sample-based traditional auditing 6-7 years ago. But you really want to focus on the journey as much as the destination, because the destination, ultimately, every couple of years, you'll probably want to make it more ambitious, as I mentioned earlier. But to get to journey, you have to sort of plan out, well, what are the key actions? So, our example, if you're there today and you said, we want to do, and this was a reality of us going back probably a decade, we wanted to employ data analytics. We wanted to be known for data analytics and full data hypothesis testing across the full populations. And of course, we looked around, the audit leadership team looked around at each other and said, well, we've got one person who knows how to do that out of 100, maybe 2. So we needed to, our vision was great, but then we didn't have the people to deliver the vision. We didn't have the skill sets. So we had to go acquire them. We had to set up a couple of data teams, hire in data scientists who weren't necessarily auditors by background. They tended to be mathematicians, and work with us and help teach us some of the basics, but then they would run the analytics and share them back with the audit team. We'd interpret them back and forth. So over a couple of years, we really got great at doing full data hypothesis testing audits, and it added tremendous value. Okay. So if you just sort of think about your audit vision, it's got sort of that North Star on the right side there. And then it's sort of the best way to think about it is, and this is what we did simply, we said, okay, what were the people initiatives, the product improvements or initiatives, and maybe the process and methodology improvements that we need to consider as an audit team to get to that vision. And of course, we came away, it took us, interestingly, it was the leadership team of 4 or 5 of us. This is going back a decade or so. And it took us a day to agree the 2-sentence vision statement, right? Which focused on data analytics, critical thinking, being responsive to risk. They were the 3 aspects, and there was one more I probably can't remember. But it took us literally almost a day of sort of putting stuff on walls and doing, SWOT analysis and all this sort of stuff. But then what we did was we sort of broke it down. Okay, what were the people improvements, people, product, and process methodology changes we needed? And that's where we defined a whole series of projects. And then we got our whole team to volunteer to help deliver the project. We got them to buy into the projects. And that then set us on this journey to sort of deliver a more strategic audit vision. And again, we updated our stakeholders, kept the audit committee aware, kept management aware. And again, it was an incredibly valuable journey, incredibly valuable. So again, there's another way of just looking at it in terms of the vision, the mission, again, the changes around products, people, and process. And for example, we ended up with lots of different audit products. So it's great to have a continuum of audit products, some big, some small, some pre-implementation, some informal. Also, we changed our methodology. We went from being a traditional methodology to having a fully embedded expectation around full data audits and hypothesis on every audit. And we slowly but surely over 2 years ramped up to pretty much achieving that, which was great. And then, of course, when we achieved that, we said, we probably could be more agile. And so when we did our second iteration of our vision, it was a big move to become agile. And what does agile mean in an internal audit sense? So again, it's sort of continuous. You never sit still. And I'm sure, that function, I've left there now 2 or 3 years. I'm sure they've progressed to an AI-enabled audit function. I'm sure I'd probably put money on it. They're probably up there doing all that. So again, having that sort of mindset is really important. So let's talk about, though, the how also with respect to culture within the internal audit team, right? So again, most internal audit teams that I know, we want to consider it the place to be. Audit's a great place to learn about the organization. It's beyond, I always tell people, beyond the C-suite. It's the one place where you can pretty much, if you want to, get eyes on almost any part of the organization, any function. And, You also, audit tends to have interaction with quite senior people because you have to sell your ideas and your results of your audits and your scope to, heads of departments, key deputies. You got to be kind of executive, and it sort of tailors your communication delivery. It helps build talent, right? So again, I think audit, even though a lot of people who are not internal auditors say, oh, internal audit, that's the third line of defense, don't want to be there. I actually think it's the other. I think actually it's the best place to learn an organization, and it's so full of opportunity to grow, and particularly if you're a critical thinker and you like to think and take on problems and want to work on your sort of communication skills. So again, for us, when I was the head of audit, we spent quite a bit of time on marketing the internal audit function, right? In terms of our transferable skills you could learn if you came to internal audit, critical thinking. Obviously, when we were one of the first functions in Swiss Re to go agile. So a lot of people came and rotated into us because they wanted to understand what agile was all about. They wanted to also understand how we were very structured, right? Every audit has a start, a middle, and an end. Audit issues and observations go through quite thorough analysis and review and discussion. So it's a very good way to sort of learn how you start with a funnel, you heap lots of stuff on it, and eventually you just get this nice flow of value that comes out of the funnel. So again, great way for internal audit, but marketing those transferable skills and capabilities. Again, we were very good at, as I mentioned earlier, we adopted analytics very early and became very capable, almost to the point that when we did audits, we obviously handed off our analytics results and know-how to management as part of our audit, but we often did teach-ins to show them how to actually tap into the data lake that the organization had and how to define their use cases. And we would get feedback from CEOs of businesses saying, well, not for nothing, but the third line's already where the first line wants to be. How is that, right? And that's because we had set our internal audit function as the place to be, right? We had the right vision. We really wanted wanted leaders from every seat, and we wanted people to progress out. And we didn't mind sharing with management. That was fine. It was very good. Built lots of trust and lots of positive interactions and stuff. So again, good stuff. Also, I think continuous learning is really important. So again, reflecting on skill sets, certifications, qualifications, all good stuff to have, but make sure that, you want to make sure that your teams are qualified and they're getting it's always great to have certifications. I always encourage my team to get extra certifications. I remember some of the people I worked with in the UK years ago, they were struggling to do, I think it was the CFA, which is a very, very tough set of exams. And I had said, well, why did you guys consider ACCA? I would have said ACA, but you couldn't go in through that. It was difficult, I think. But that's maybe a different story. But just getting them to, and then seeing them a couple of years later, actually taking all those exams and passing, and then knowing that a couple of those team members are fully qualified accountants and they put the effort in sort of part-time. It was great. It's a very rewarding thing to see. All right. But again, you want your audit function to be where leaders develop. You really want to have a high impact in a team. You want to make sure that you've got a shared risk culture and that you're operating, in a very professional way. You're fit for purpose. So again, you really want to make sure that you have that, and you want to market it, both not just your own team members who will kind of know, but also to all your management teams. You want people, I think it's a good thing to think about talent coming in to internal audit from other functions. So again, this slide really just a sales orientation of audit. You want to be on the right. You want to be much more forward looking. You don't necessarily want to be backward looking. Of course, there's audits where you have to look at the last 6 months or 12 months of data, but equally you can take what you've learned from that and you can sort of project it forward, and you can sort of also be objective about insights and opportunities for management. And we're going to get into that because I think one of the biggest values from any audit, it's not just the findings. So audit issues are audit issues. They're very good for stewardship and for the board and the audit committee. But you'll tend to find if you've got really good audit teams and really teams that are really engaged, they pick up on so much stuff at what I call at the coalface, right? And sharing that, even if it's I often call it a trail of breadcrumbs. We don't have the time to solve and say, well, this insight actually is a massive opportunity. We just have time to say, we think there's an insight here. Here's an opportunity. Management, you need to sort of take that, assess yourselves and run with it, because we have to get on to our next audit, right? But if you just do that consistently on every audit and have, 4 or 5 potential opportunities to talk about, you're worth your weight in gold. So with that, David, we get to polling question number 3.
And I've launched the poll, Shane, launching it now. And the question is, have you adopted Agile auditing? And select one of the following. We are fully Agile, we're currently implementing Agile, we're considering going Agile, or we're still a traditional audit function. So pick one of those and respond. And I'm going to close the poll. And I'm going to share the results. And just under half, Shane, are still a traditional audit function. 8% are fully Agile.
Okay, thanks for sharing the results. So that's it's quite surprising actually, because I would say in the world of AI, full data analytics, the sort of everything getting faster in terms of business cycles, technology cycles, traditional audit functions are at risk, I would say. Might be facing a Neanderthal kind of a moment at some point. So again, Neanderthals being, they went extinct because they couldn't adapt to their environment. I think they may have wanted to, but they couldn't, and so they went extinct. There's a lot of change going on in the audit world, but I think being agile, and maybe not being fully agile as in very, very strict process that follows like, the typical IT development agile sense, but definitely using sprints, sort of setting out doing your work in sort of, we did it in two weekly bursts, having retrospectives on your sprints and having a sprint review where you openly share the raw results every 2 weeks, not spending weeks spiffing it up for management. What I used to tell management was, what I've seen on a Wednesday night, or Wednesday afternoon, is what you're seeing on Thursday morning. Maybe with a couple of words edited and stuff, but it's pretty much exactly the same as the team gave me. And we just talked about it. And it wasn't, some issues, we had some issues and some insights, and some things would say, oh no, we take care of that. That's not an issue. It was just very open. It spurred very open conversation with management, brought them much more into the audit itself than just waiting for a final closing meeting where there's going to be surprises. We tried to, Agile is great at taking surprises off the table, making sure everyone's aware of what's going on. And also you can take perspective and feedback from management as to what you may want to focus on in your following sprints. Obviously audit controls the final decision on what scope to do and what not to do, obviously. The other thing I liked about Agile is that it really helps you, you have the sense of you try and finish what you start every sprint, and it really, at some point, you sort of stop, you stop doing low-level test work, right? You've achieved a certain amount of value, you found a bunch of issues, and you say, okay, we found a bunch of issues, we've added enough value. We look at our backlog and say, there's other audits we need to start, and you get out of this sense that happens in a lot of audit functions. I've seen it years ago in when I was in banking. People would tick and tie 3 months and have no audit issues, but they have a beautiful file, and everything was nice and perfect. And it's like they probably could have stopped the audit after 4 weeks, 6 weeks, and done something more valuable. So that's the part I like about Agile. So Agile principles, and what I would say is having Agile principles, and particularly the retrospectives, the sort of talking among the team, reflecting, making small little incremental improvements. If you do that every 2 weeks, across the year, you've done 26 incremental improvements, which can be a lot of value that you've added, a lot of efficiency, a lot of effectiveness you've added to your audit team. So again, very, very big supporter of Agile principles in internal audit functions. So anyway, I want to go back here. So I want to talk a little bit about relationship sales, and I'm probably a little bit interesting internal audit character, even though I'm in operational risk these days. Midway through my career, actually, when I was on Wall Street, I worked for the head of fixed income sales at a big investment bank, and I helped coordinate the relationship sales function. So they had 8 managing directors that sold the bank to their biggest clients. They didn't sell any individual product, they just sold the whole relationship. And so I probably have some unique perspective to share. We've all heard of the movie The Wolf of Wall Street, Leonardo DiCaprio, and there's sort of a bit of a depraved character. Don't want to touch on that movie per se, other than the piece at the very end when he's a reformed character and he's having the sessions where he's asking people to sell him the pen. So again, you kind of all of a sudden he's real nice and he's very calm and he's collected and he's maybe showing he really does have the charisma and the focus. So I talk about this, like, sell me the audit and sell me these insights, right? And so a lot of it comes down to behaviors, right? That for internal auditors, it's so important that we actually demonstrate that we care, right? And you got to tell management that you care. Like I would be very clear when I would kick things off in an audit. I say, hey, we're going to look out for insights and opportunities to help your business grow and thrive. We're going to actively look for that. We're going to actively share that with you. We're going to be upfront about things. If we come across a big problem or we think it's a big problem, we're going to immediately run it past you. We're not going to wait till the end of the audit. We're just going to tell you. We're going to share it with you. You can feed back, and if you can help, clarify it, that's great. But you got to like the sort of traits of great salespeople, and you can read them there. But the sense of being humble is kind of important. And one of the things that the head of sales I work for, when he talked to his sales force of all the sort of salesmen and women who are in different products, selling bonds, different types of bonds, government bonds, corporate bonds, high yield bonds, etc., to all the big institutional clients, he used to always tell them, he says, strive to be number one, but act like you're number 2 or 3. And what did he mean by that? What he meant by that was be humble. Of course, it's a very competitive landscape trying to get the business from different competitors, and sort of getting the trades. And so, but he said, be thankful. Even if you don't get the big trade, be thankful. If you build enough trust, the opportunities will come. Okay, and I think there's a lot of lessons in that. And that was in a very competitive fixed income, multi-billion-dollar business back in my time in Wall Street. And again, just that sense that they really, really focusing on the ability, again, it comes back to some of those core scale skills, being convincing, having empathy, being authentic is kind of important. So audit needs all these skills. So the relationship sales view, I want to present this chart. And I developed this, I first presented this course to the Institute of Internal Auditors. They had seen an article I'd written a few years ago on LinkedIn. They asked me, could you turn this into a webinar and present it at the Emerging Leaders Conference in Vegas? I think it was in 23, end of 23. And I said, sure. So I did that. So I focused on, if you take the red circle is 3 years, okay, 3 years view of interactions, let's say a particular management team, particular functional head or whatever. So in that, probably routinely you'll do one audit. Let's say it's a 90-day audit. Again, some of my audits are 60 days, some are 120 days. But let's say you do one audit and it's a formal audit. But then across the rest of the sort of 3 years, what else is going on? Well, most of you, I hope, will have quarterly updates where you're checking in with management, you're learning about what's going on in the business. So if you sort of take a step back and you say, well, hold on, I did one formal audit, but then I've got 11 other checkpoints and interactions, like, which is more important? Yeah, the 90-day one for sure is more intense, but what, you've got a lot of opportunity to add value in the, in the green circles, right? Which I call the informal audit cycle. And you really got to make sure you have a strategy to maximize your internal audit, informal audit cycle and generate value, right? It's really, really important. And there's ways to do that, right? So it comes down to sometimes how you interact with management, right? So again, here's another way to look at it. You got the formal one audit every 2 or 3 years, whatever way you want to do it, and they have all the quarterly updates or interactions. So yes, the form is going to provide assurance. It's going to identify audit issues and stuff, ratings. It's going to be the formal stuff, stuff we do day in, day out with your eyes closed. But the informal, this is where you're going to build trust. This is why I put the informal supporting the formal, right? The informal is where you build trust, develop relationships, you exert influence without control, you share stuff, right? You share insights, calls to action, you ask for feedback, you talk about talent transfer, all these sorts of things is all part of the informal audit cycle, okay? And it can be, like some people say, oh, well, that's all nice. Is that internal audit gone soft? No, it's absolutely not internal audit gone soft. It's internal audit basically sharpening their skill sets to make their audit product, the formal product, more valuable. Okay, and so it's not about being soft, right? If you, and I'm sure a lot of you were like me when I was doing the testing and internal audit many years ago, earlier in my career. Most audit comments and findings came from conversations, asking and probing about stuff. And when this happens, what do you do? And when that happens, oh, has this scenario ever come up? Yeah, what new products? How do you manage these new products? How do you get them set up? Asking all these sort of questions in an informal sense is actually what informs you about doing a better audit. Yeah. So again, another way to look at it is, the famous view with an iceberg, right? Where again, I forget my geography exactly. I think it's about is it about 9% I think is above the water, and about 91% is below the waterline, or something like that. And that's kind of similar actually to our previous slide, right? That is so again, obviously in an iceberg, it's more like what to look out for. The dangers lurking beneath the waterline sometimes as much as above it. But you get the point, right? There's a thing there. So how do you go about building that? So art of building trust, right? It's really important. So I would say invest in the management relationships. And your idea here is that you want to have, if you have a regular catch up, let's say it's quarterly, there's opportunities here. One, make sure you turn up for those. Don't just cancel them. I've seen people that just cancel. Oh, I don't have anything to talk about this quarter, I'm just canceling it. Well, don't do that. But make sure if you have we used to have like a 1-page agenda. It's always nice to turn up with something. Have a 1-page agenda, and it might be like 5 or 6 bullet points you want to ask the business, performance, regulatory matters, and blah blah blah. Maybe their organization structure and risks, but then also have a couple of bullets for internal audit the feedback. It could be on insights you've learned, or think what you're thinking about for the plan, or it could be a view of your State of the Union report, or it could be some sort of call to action that you've recently issued across the entire organization. Always have something to give back, and that's where you build trust, and that's where you actually start demonstrating to management that actually you care enough to actually come with something that they haven't even asked for. But then they say, well, that's interesting. What about this? So you engage in conversation about it, right? And again, another good thing is to also try and, if you can, do some of these meetings with, if you have assurance partners, like say in compliance or governance, operational risk. It's good if you can, for some of the key stakeholders, to have everyone in the same meeting. And that worked very well for us. We didn't do it all the time like that. It was fine for people to meet separately as well. But the whole point is really, you want to invest in the overall relationship more so than just I come do an audit every 2 or 3 years and then I disappear and sort of keep it low key. You want to have that level of engagement. And sometimes it's particularly insights can be really helpful. Yeah, and I'll talk about those in a second. But I think insights, and one of the examples I give, and I've given it many times, is that we used to have, one of the organizations I worked at, we had a very formal set of requirements about spreadsheets, EUAs, end user applications. And there was a lot of expectations about how they would be logged, controlled as best they could. I mean, obviously it's kind of not great to have lots and lots of complexity in spreadsheets and not in proper systems. But again, we had thousands of these fairly critical spreadsheets across the organization, some more critical than others. But we grappled with thinking, well, we do an audit of that, compliance with that set of standards, and we said, well, probably pretty quickly just looked at the data in the system and said, that's going to be, I could write the report now, it will be a disaster, right? So we said, rather than taking 6 months to do an audit, why don't we just pull together a snapshot of what's in the system as best we could, sort of highlighting maybe by business area, just had a 1-pager of sort of high-level stats, kind of read between the lines, see how you compare it to the other business divisions. And then we outlined what were the requirements, what's the expectations on management. And in our organization, managing directors, it was 250 or so. They were personally responsible for this policy. So it kind of was a call to action to all managing directors. And then obviously best practices, what controls should you have? Clearly, if you have complex EUAs, you should be looking to put them into proper systems. We don't want complex spreadsheets hanging around if the functionality can be put into a properly controlled system. And so, in a matter of a couple of weeks, we pulled together this, what we call a call to action, or we called it a quarterly message. We sent it out to all of our contacts. So like all the managing directors got it, all the directors, all the VPs. So it went to thousands of people. But just, didn't draw any conclusion other than like, hey, I'd probably take a look at this data. There's probably opportunities for management to do a better job here. And that, in a couple of weeks, that got everybody focused on adhering to the policy, understanding their gaps. Of course, it wasn't lost on us that some of the board members look at that and said, that's not very good. How come we look like we're the worst? What's going on? Didn't take too many people to read between the lines, particularly at the executive level. But that was a call to action, and that got things moving way faster than a formal audit. And that was like a 7-page PowerPoint, right? So again, there's ways to do these things, right? So informal audit opportunities, insights for sure, and insights I think are those what I describe as those opportunities on every audit. We should be trying to generate, again, just opportunities for management to do something different. So the way we used to position insights would be, hey, we've come across these potential opportunities for management. We don't have time to fully ground them out, but there might be something there. Please take these insights, and we used to put them into a Word document, but there tend to be like 2 or 3 pages. They weren't very long insight memos. But the whole point was, we said, listen, this is to help position internal audit to be catalysts for positive organizational change. We don't need any responses to these insights, but what we want you to do is understand what we're saying, and we talk them through it. Mull over it yourself and your management team. Debate it, discuss it. Maybe we've picked up on one angle, but actually when you guys discuss it, you say, actually, what audit is really picking up on is this problem or this opportunity. Let management run with it. And that's a great way to for audit to be, and I said, we used to love that saying, catalyst for positive organizational change. And again, that becomes part of the culture of the organization, and part of then what management expects when you come around again to do an audit in their world. They're like, oh yeah, there was issues, but there was also a bunch of opportunities. And how do we seize those opportunities, right? So again, there's many listed here as opportunities. Again, offsite participation, going to town halls, all that sort of stuff. But the biggest, again, most of your audits, you should have some insights, and I've definitely seen my current organization, I see lots of insights being shared on audits routinely, actually integrated into the same report, which is great. We kept them separate, but I think that's great. But then the firm-wide ones, they're sort of bigger or broader. That could be on topics in common. That could be on new values in the organization. It could be on spreadsheets. It could be on it could be on user access. It could be on anything that's a bit more shared. It could be on reliance on third parties, third-party control reports. It could be on many different topics, right? But again, that's where you can add value. So at that, David, we're at polling question number 4.
We are, and I've just launched the poll. And the poll is, how important are relationships with management to help internal audit? Select one of critical, very helpful, sometimes helpful, or not an area we focus on. And in addition, if you have any questions, please log them, and we will get to them either shortly or after the event. Thank you. And I'm going to close the poll. I'm going to share the results, and 65% Shane say critical to our success. So I'm going to hide that now and pass back to you, Shane.
Okay, well, that's good. That's what I was hoping for, and hopefully even higher than that. I mean, I think again, relationships with management, going back to one of the earlier domains discussion, being a good sparring partner, being open and honest, and sort of, being open and saying that you want them to thrive, right? Because a lot of management view internal audit with suspicion. They think internal audit's there to just get them fired or go, aha, I caught you out, So you just got to be open about that and just say, well, that's not what we're trying to do at all, right? We're trying to help you thrive, and these are the sorts of things, the behaviors we're going to bring, practices we're going to bring to the table to help your function thrive, right? And that's a big thing. So again, we talked about insights quite a bit, obviously in the earlier slides. We'll just see if there's anything, I'll put these up on the screen. Again, I talk about them as being opportunities to do something different, informal. Some people deliver insights verbally. They're on audits, they just feed it back, have a part of it might be their closing meeting to just say, hey, we had a few things, feed them back. We found that just putting them in writing, it just helped management sort of then have something to reflect on themselves in their next management meeting or whatever. That worked very well for us. We use Word. I've seen other teams use PowerPoint. Either's fine, right? So verbal just sense that it maybe didn't mean that much and was likely to be, not even taken up or thought about by management. So we also had very different styles. I talked about it, in our internal audit reports were all written in the negative. They were very short, and all they focused on was weaknesses and action plans. There was no niceties about management. It was great and all this sort of stuff. But then the flip side was our insights were totally different. They were much more very open style, opportunistic, very friendly and cordial. Which again, it was very different. That's why we probably kept them in separate reports now that I think about it. But again, those opportunities, again, people tend to respond more when it's open and it's they can think about it. And again, it's one of the key things of how you exert influence without control. Again, management could run with your insights and generate or develop better controls or better risk management understanding, or even grow their business better. We're not checking on them. We don't ask for any feedback. But you'll be surprised that when you're talking to management in your regular checkups, if something was a great success, they'll say, "Oh, those insights were great. We did X, Y, and Z after that, and now we figured out something." Like again, you get credit for helping management. So I always talked about it as the world of opportunity. I've talked about this slightly before in terms of your kickoff meetings being upfront when an audit announcement's about, if you really want management to, to succeed. So you want to try and identify compelling insights. And again, it's all about being trusted. Talked a little bit before too about formal audit products versus informal. So again, the formal stuff you're well used to. Informal though, I think again, it can be just relationship feedback, insights, risk and control reviews, even management challenge sessions. So some of these times, and I used to reflect on when I was in a leadership team, we used to sit with EY actually every 6 months or so, just for half a day, 2 or 3 hours in a just banding around topics and discussions. What were we doing in our audit function? What were they seeing as best practice? We always came out of those management challenge sessions with 2 or 3 real nuggets of value, things we could add to our journey, pivot our sort of vision. Internal audit can do the same thing with management. Just book a 2 or 3 hour, maybe they walk you through their self-assessment, you challenge them. I would say if you came out of that after 2 or 3 hours with a couple of potential, some issues or weaknesses, you don't have to raise them as audit comments. Get management to put them into the enterprise risk system, and you won't have to do a detailed audit necessarily of that area. You say you've given some assurance already. You could do some of that. That could be a great opportunity particularly to cover areas that maybe don't really warrant a full-blown audit anyway. But you want to cover more of your sort of the risk, the risk instances across your environment. So I'm going to just get to some closing remarks. So again, focus more on the how. Leverage sales skills, I think, to make your sort of relationships and your audit work much more valuable. Be empathetic, but again, be informal. It's not always about being a formal technical auditor. Most auditors that add the most value are actually people who connect and resonate with management and the audit committee chair in a way that they speak the same language, right? So it's very, very important. And again, I think if you can take away one thing, try and position your organization, your audit team, to be catalysts for positive organizational change. That's a great sort of risk cultural and a great vision to have for how your team is perceived. And then obviously align your behaviors and your initiatives to support that. So with that, we've come to the end of my prepared remarks. David, I don't know if there's any questions in the Q&A or if there's any topics you want to raise.
Hi, Shane. I've just popped back. We've got about 5 minutes remaining. I have got time for a couple of questions. I have got a couple I jotted down as we were going through. So let me start with, how does the focus on sales and relationships by internal audit improve the quality of internal audit's work product? For example, issues, insights around AI use cases, reports.
Yeah, no, I think it absolutely does, because if you have a more open relationship with management, you're going to be more informed, right? I come back to one of the examples I gave. Almost every audit issue I ever came across, most of the key points came from conversation. And I was probably particularly adept at having very open conversations and coming across being a trusted individual, but just taking it all in. Again, so I think that informality breeds you're better informed. And then of course you can apply, we can bounce ideas off each other and stuff, but I think it just makes audit more informed, and then allows us to sort of think about what's the right type of audit, when should we perform an audit? Should we do something that's more informal or something that's more formal and traditional? So I just think it builds that level of knowledge for the internal auditor, and really, if you're not getting that sense, I think we've all been in times when there's auditees or management who are very closed off. They won't share. And then you're kind of struggling for context. what's happening in the business. And again, that can pose other challenges in terms of, management's risk-related behaviors, which probably wouldn't sit too well in most organizations. But I'm sure we've all seen that in experience. So you want people to talk, you want people to openly share, and you want people to value. They want people to value the audit work and the opportunities that audit is going to play back, both in the ends of the audit, but also in the sprint reviews and in your sort of, if you do traditional auditing, your sort of fieldwork check-ins. Just be very open and transparent. Don't dress things up. Be as raw as you can. That's where you build trust.
Okay, I think I've got time for one more question, at least. So, and this might, I hope this doesn't catch you out off guard. So, thinking about what you're presenting, could a focus on sales and relationship skills by internal audit compromise independence?
Yeah, I don't think so. I think it only makes audits work more valuable and more focused, right? So again, when I talk about sales, it's like, and then we think about it, it's like influencing skills, convincing skills, being empathetic, all those sort of behaviors, they just make internal audit more informed and ultimately being able to deliver a better message, be more open and transparent, and add more value to the organization. So now, as I said, I think I said on one of the earlier slides, none of this is about internal audit going soft. It's absolutely not. It's actually, in many respects, it's the other way around. It's making audit much more informed and much more effective. And if you deliver effective audit products, whether formal or informal, and you have great resonance and connection with management and the audit committee, your organization, your audit team is going to thrive, and people are going to be asking you to do reviews and asking you to get involved and asking you to present at offsites and to their management teams, right? So that's what will make audit more valuable.
Okay, so I think I have time for one last question, and then I'll do a wrap. And this is, and I know you mentioned this briefly earlier, but if you had to pick one aspect to focus on to improve internal audit sales and relationship skills with management, what would it be? What's the one thing?
Yeah, I think the one thing, it used to be for me, it was like sort of sharing perspective on data analytics and stuff like that, in terms of sharing insights and use cases that they could resonate with and help them, because, particularly in my function, we were probably ahead of the curve. Today, it's probably putting on your AI hat and sort of saying, okay, if you've already come up with use cases and ideas and suggestions, help management as well. They're probably going through the same grappling, trying to figure it out. You might have come up with some opportunities. Again, auditors tend to work in a very structured way. So use that. Sell and share your perspective openly. And you'd be surprised how what you might think is a small thing actually helps management in a big way. So yeah, I'd just be very open and transparent, I would say.
Okay, well, thank you very much for that, Shane. So I'd like to thank you for presenting, and I'd like to mention that our next webinar will be on May the 20th at noon Eastern. It will be our first Beyond Accounting session of 2025. The topic is the era of energy disruption, featuring Gerard Reed, who provides strategic advisory, investment insights, and thought leadership at the intersection of energy, finance, technology, and geopolitics. So with that, you may now sign out, and thank you for attending.